welcome to this Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting on Tuesday the 22nd of October. First item is apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies?
No apologies.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move to the minutes of the last meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the 17th of September 2024 be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No, thank you. So we can take it that the minutes are approved. Item 3 concerns urgent items. I haven't been advised of any urgent items, so we take it there are none. Item 4, do we have any declarations of interest? There's none from me. No, thank you, no declarations of interest. So that brings us to item 5, which is the people strategy, and I think we're having a PowerPoint presentation, is that correct? Okay, thank you, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I was asked to bring along to ONS the blueprint for the people strategy. As you all know, the corporate plan is now in place, and what falls under the underpins the corporate plan is one of the documents is people strategy. And so this is really to take overview and scrutiny through what our approach will be in developing that strategy over the next few months, and looking for any comments the committee may have around what they would like to see within that strategy, or some more detail, and answer any questions that you may have today. So just going through the slides, what I have also done is put, oh, they've changed around, just put on here what we normally include around who we are, our ambition and our values, the strategic themes on their draft that I have in the PowerPoint today. It's very important within this strategy as well to have our workforce profile and how we're going to measure that success. I mean, because the people strategy needs to really focus on our recruitment, our retention, our learning and development, and how we engage with our staff, and what that ambition is for our workforce. So just moving on. The next slide just sets out our previous strategy that came to its conclusion back in 23. This was our ambition that we set then. I think we're in a very different place now, so it will look different in terms of the direction of travel for Thurrock. So this literally just gives you an idea if you didn't see our previous strategy, rather than taking you through, that is exactly what we're having. I think it's important to know as well, we also have as well, that sits alongside the people strategy, our equality and diversity and inclusion strategy that sets out the key actions around equality and diversity and inclusion for the council. And that is aligned to as well some of the external stuff that Natalie Smith usually presents to the Equality Outcomes Board as well. So that comes into a lot more detail. If you move on to the next slide for me. So this was about how we realise our ambition. So we are always looking at how we're recruiting our staff, how we're retaining, what's the attraction, what's our talent management. So this is when we start doing that development. We'll be looking at all of that. What's our employee value proposition, what we're here, what's our brand, how do we bring people and raise the skills of our workforce, how does that fit in, and in terms of Thurrock and our transformation and our direction of travel. So what do we really want that workforce to be? And the skills are a really key part of that in terms of delivering to our residents, which is first and foremost. Next slide. So as you will know from the corporate plan, we had our 3 value statements agreed as part of that, and a lot of work was involved in engaging with the workforce at all different levels in developing those values last year. So we've got those now. We're now working across, and one of the key things that will be part of the strategy as well is around the leadership behaviours and the staff behaviours, and creating that framework that sits alongside the people strategy. In terms of the themes that we're looking at is around strategic workforce planning, high-performing, capable and skilled organisation, compassionate and inclusive, effective leadership, that's where the behaviour framework and the competencies come in, developing and embedding an organisational culture where morale is low. So what we'll do that sits, again, forms part of the people strategy is a very detailed action plan as we move through the development. We often have been talking since intervention around the change of culture within the organisation, what that looks like in terms of for our workforce profile as well. What does that mean at all levels? Because as you know, there's a number of cultures that sit in any type of organisation, all the different subcultures, but what does that say in terms of our ambition moving forward? So as we go through the development over the next 3 months, so we will look to have a people strategy ready for agreement by January 24, and the action plan that sits around that in terms of what are all of those OD interventions that we need to be, organisational development interventions that we need to be putting in place, what's the learning and development, how are we upskilling our organisation, and what the plans for that will be. So this will all form part of the content of the people strategy. How we will develop that is by engagement, that true engagement around all levels of the organisation, including members, including trade unions, to develop what that strategy will be. The alignment there is in terms of to our corporate plan and be underpinned by our new values and the behaviour frameworks that sit underneath that are currently in development. I think one of the things in terms of delivering that is being creative. Is we've also recently got our new redesigned HR and OD function that is starting to embed, and how we're in upskilling that team to help support and enable the organisation moving forward through that collaboration piece. And as you know, it was part of the intervention as well, and the strategic directions around leadership and management and that behaviour, that performance and that accountability and responsibility. So all of this will form part of that delivery of the people strategy. What we also do in terms of monitoring now, my colleagues to the left will be talking about PMAF later on, but we're very much aligned to the framework, the performance framework, but as part of the people strategy, we go into a lot more detail around the KPIs that we monitor and report into SLT on a quarterly basis, and that's really around 5 key areas. That is our workforce profile, our workforce diversity, our workforce health, that includes attrition, turnover, overtime, sickness, and those kind of statistics, workforce development and workforce performance. So we have quite a range of KPIs that sit under that will form part of that monitoring piece. How will we measure that success, which is, I think, the last slide. Okay, so we know when we got this right. Okay, so this is about improvements in our staff survey. As you may be aware, we've recently done a staff survey, so we're working through the results of that at the moment. So a real test of that will be how we've improved against the staff survey next year when we do another one. The whole digital transformation piece, how that has informed, how that has improved work and how we deliver our services, how we attract and retain the best talent, our reputation, and I think how people speak of us, not just our staff, but our reputation out in the community, speaking highly of officers and how we work within the council. That whole coaching and mentoring is visible in teams, and that coaching management style is really important as we shift our culture within the organisation and how we manage our people. Again, there's that piece around career development, promotions, internal, secondments, job shadowing. How are we really developing our staff within the organisation? ED&I in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion, and how that runs through. How does our workforce profile reflect against the community and the demographics within the community? as well, and expectations of our customers and being a high-performing culture. Again, about that well-being piece and reputation, which is a really key piece. So if we're going to look at how do we measure its success, these are the key things that we'll be looking at moving forward. So all of this will form over the next few months as we do that engagement and start to develop the people strategy. That is what we're actually looking to develop and ensure that we have the right people with the right skills, capability in place with the right talent for the organisation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tina. Do members have any questions or comments? Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few comments or questions, but if you don't mind, I'll sort of start at the back. Draft KPIs, turnover and attrition. I'm guessing, I mean, how sophisticated a measure is that going to be? Because I'm guessing if you're talking about some of the things like getting the right people in the right roles with the right skills, the right abilities, you are looking at a certain amount of movement. If you're looking at developing your culture, you are possibly looking at not necessarily wanting to move people on, but some people deciding that they're not part of that. So to what extent is your turnover and attrition a case of low turnover, low attrition equals good, high turnover, high attrition equals bad? Is there going to be any more sort of sophistication to that measure than that?
Councillor, thank you for the question. So in terms of, the sophistication is the detail that sits behind that. So where is that turnover happening? Okay. How fast is that happening? Because we also look at those who leave the council within the first year of the business as well. So there's a lot more detail that sits underneath that one figure of like 12 or 13% that you would see as a statistic for a turnover, which is actually quite stable in a lot of local authorities, because we also look and measure against our external other local authorities of a similar size, etc. So yes, so there is detail that sits underneath that.
Thanks. And just, I won't hog the mic, but performance reviews, 100% completion rate. Are you looking to measure quality of performance reviews?
Absolutely. So as part of the strategic directions as well, it's about looking at performance management, and we've been doing that piece of work and drafting a new performance management framework for all levels of the organisation. And at the moment, we have an appraisal process that is a mid-year review and an end of year and starting, which a lot of organisations actually have. What we're proposing very much is about continuous conversations. Okay, and it's the quality of that being a two-way discussion and not system related. And this is all about our cultural shift that we need to make within the organisation.
Great, thanks. The quality of process is right in there. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbas, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I've just a few questions. You know, obviously we are in very difficult situation, and obviously council's priorities are changing on daily basis. So will that be, this strategy would be a final piece of work, or is that a live strategy?
So most strategies should be a live document. What we will be doing is making sure this is aligned to our priorities. It's usually only a 2 to 3 year document, and we will align that working with our strategy colleagues to the left on how long that will be reflected against the corporate plan. And what will evolve is the actions that we actually take, because what should stand is what we're trying to achieve and what our ambition is. So the involvement and the live piece is the actions.
Just in terms of implementation, I think if I heard correctly, you did mention, like, you know, the plan is to implement this in January 2025.
So the plan is to have it developed by January 2025, yes. So it'll take that 3 months to develop what thinking about all of the engagement work that we need to do.
So do you think it's enough time, these 3 months, or?
Should be, having done a number of people strategies in my career, yes.
Okay. Just another quick one. You know, obviously you did mention you just conducted a staff survey. So can you share some of those outcomes, and have you taken into account those feedback into this strategy?
Yes, we have. We had a really positive staff survey of 51% response rates from the organisation. We're in the process of working through with all DMTs, so Directorate Management Teams and staff and trade unions, the results of those surveys, so that we can start developing the action plans that are required at both a local level as well as a corporate level. So all of that will feed into the staff survey results. Some of those really high results or strengths of the organisation from the staff survey was around pay, which is the fair deal area theme of the survey, and also around management. So in terms of that line management relationship, in terms of areas of improvement, that was around purpose and clarity of the organisation and improving around leadership and my company. As you know, there's also 63% of our staff who are residents, so there's been an impact on morale over the last couple of years.
Another one, yeah. Just quickly, you know, obviously we have this 51% response rate. So, you know, to kind of achieve maximum from this strategy, so what kind of measures will you take next year? So obviously there would be another survey going into next year. So how will we make sure we will have this maximum response from employees?
So in terms of that response rate, that actually is quite average across local government sector. But we can not tell people that they need to do it, we can only encourage. And I think the more morale and we work through the cultural shift within the organisation, we should see a much higher response rate. This time, we've done a lot of work with our frontline workers out in waste and areas like that where we've seen really poor responses in the past, and that really proved successful. So we will continue to do as much as we can across the management tiers as well, because it's not just one team that does that, to increase uptake of completion.
Thank you. A few questions from me. In a nutshell, can you just explain how this new strategy is different from the old strategy? What's new, and what have we learned from the old strategy that has shaped this one?
Thanks, Chair. So we're still developing this, so there's not a new strategy to do that comparison, but we always do a lessons learned, a wrap up in terms of all of the actions from the previous strategy that we needed to report on to SLT, etc. So a lot of that was around the changes, the learning and development, and we're in a different place now, so our priorities very much have changed now. So that's where, through the development process, we've got new values. So it should look and feel different and be very much centred on where we are as an organisation now and where we intend to be in terms of that purpose and vision that's been set out in the corporate plan. So the development piece is still to happen, rather than give you a direct comparison.
Okay. And in terms of the values and themes that are contained in the strategy, how were they arrived at? How were they shaped? What was the process by which you came to those?
So in terms of shaping those, we done a huge engagement piece with staff at all levels in terms of the 6 values that we previously had. Did they resonate? Was they real in terms of where we are as an organisation now? And the result of that work was the feedback of those 3 statements that we now have. that all staff signed up to and went through the whole process with members as well as part of the corporate plan. And then, so that's how they came about. And in terms of the themes, when we're looking at our priorities right now as an organisation, strategic workforce planning of what is the profile, what are the staff, what is the horizon scanning of where we're travelling. So it's important to have that strategic workforce planning done. So the themes came from, right now we've been talking about and developing our change of culture. So that's where that piece came in. So it's all, so far, what you're seeing there about those themes has come from the engagement with staff at all levels and partners.
Thank you. And one final question from me, just for clarity, what's the, in terms of the KPIs, what's the monitoring and reporting process?
So we currently report quarterly through SLT, and equally we do monthly reporting locally for directorates. The HRBPs take that information to directorates on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Are there any other, Councillor Fletcher?
Thanks, Chair. It's just really a comment, and immediately I say this, you're going to go, ugh, because as you say, values, like they're probably the one bit of a strategy that takes more fiddling around with and talking to people and rewriting than any others. But I've got an idea, so bear with me. We talk about holding ourselves to account to get things done. I honestly think one of the issues that we have had with this organisation is that perhaps sometimes gets in the way of stopping and thinking, is this the right thing? So personally, I would like to see people in the council holding themselves to account to get the right things done. Appreciate that, oh Christ, we've got it this far, we managed to negotiate it this far, and somebody wants to chuck another thing in. I think it would be worthwhile considering that, purely because I think the issue is not always that we don't get things done, it's that we can tend to steamroller things through without actually checking, is this the right direction to take?
Thank you, Councillor, and I think that's very much comes through in what actions we take as well in terms of challenging that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tina. I don't think we're specifically asked to make any recommendations or specifically agree anything, but thank you for presenting that to us, and I hope our comments have been helpful.
Yep, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so item 6, Thurrock Council's communication and engagement strategy. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Chair, and nice to see you all again. You'll recall I was here at the end of July. It was a bit lighter, and you gave me some very helpful sort of questioning and comments on the sort of approach that I was planning to take in developing our comms and engagement strategy. I think it's quite neat to follow on from Tina talking about cultural change, because actually the thing that was most insightful and surprising in the conversation we had was that how we communicate and engage with our communities is a whole council thing. It's not just what sits with the comms and engagement teams. And I hope that you've seen that reflected in the strategy which we've then pulled together. This strategy looks at the how primarily, because as a council that needs to change the way it communicates and engages, we've got a piece of work to do with staff, particularly to get them to think differently about how we communicate. For all the reasons we discussed at the time, that it's not just about putting out a press release or a tweet. We need to be meaningful in how we engage with different communities. The what is shorter, because effectively this is a 6-month strategy. No doubt after the election in May, we'll want to revisit this and look at a kind of longer list of things that we want to do. But we've set out 3 campaigns to see us through to that point, which seem to be the most urgent things. So they're focusing on the Fresh Start, which you've seen in Tina's presentation and elsewhere, which is about helping staff and residents see that we're approaching things differently. We're trying to be positive about the borough and tell a positive story. and follow that through in how we act and how we engage with residents. We've got the pilot looking at locality kind of neighbourhood working, which we're starting imminently, and will see us through into the spring when we'll bring a report to Cabinet looking at a kind of blueprint for more local working. And I can never remember three things. The third thing, which is, Patrick, help me out here. The really important and really timely thing, which is our cost of living campaign, Thurrock Cares, which we're about to roll out. So we're hoping to start rolling that out from a week on Monday, and that will be a whole council effort working with our voluntary sector partners to get important and timely information out to residents about a whole range of cost of living support, benefits advice, clearly encouraging people who are eligible for pension credit to sign up for it, given how important that is now with changes to winter fuel payments. So some solid pieces of work that we think will see us through to the spring in terms of the things that matter most to residents. But as I say, primarily this is a strategy for taking the council into a sort of different way of approaching communications and engagement. I probably said enough, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Louise. Any questions from members? Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. You brought up a major campaign in Thurrock Cares. How else, apart from social media, are you planning to get that out to residents?
Thanks, Councillor Green. We've got a full plan which includes roadshows around the borough, working with voluntary sector partners like Citizens Advice, Thurrock, CBS, and others to take advice and support out to local venues through the winter. We'll be using all the council channels, so as you say, social media, but also the council's e-newsletter, staff newsletter, and a whole range of activity really to get out to libraries. We're going to have warm spaces in all our libraries. We'll be promoting food banks and other ways that people can get support that they need. We'll be writing to all the people that potentially could be claiming pension credit but aren't. So yeah, a full plan of activity to get that information out, and we'll be writing also to all councillors when we launch to ask you to help us get the word out as well.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Abbas.
Yeah, thank you for the report. Just in terms of, you said it's like to rebuild trust with our communities and residents. So obviously it's not just the wording and how we communicate, this is also like how we deliver our services. So how we will ensure this trust is not just a verbal or a nicely worded wordings, So how we'll ensure so we are also delivering services and then rebuilding trust, because we don't see anything. Obviously, it's a wide, different departmental work, but how we will kind of liaise all this in terms of to make sure we are in reality rebuilding this trust?
That's a tricky question, Councillor. I think some of it is about how we work with staff to encourage everyone to be realistic and speak with one voice about the pressures that the council does face, because it's not all going to be plain sailing, obviously. But I find that if you are honest with residents about what you can do and what you can't do, normally you have a much better conversation. So I think that really is about that cultural piece with staff, to make sure that everyone's being honest, being realistic, but being very polite and empathetic in the way that they're delivering that information to residents as well.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations stroke questions. The code that the current government has issued, I have to admit I was quite surprised that in amongst those lawful, cost-effective, objective, even-handed, etc., I didn't see easy to read. And we are going to need to put that way up the list of priorities because we're not there now. So that's the comment. Well, actually, that's one comment. The other one, I think reading through, I do like a lot of what's in here. I think it really does address a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of how to make our council-led communications more effective. But I think we are missing a trick by not specifically referring in here to resident-led communications, how we respond to their communications, because there is certainly there's massive benefit in becoming better, becoming much more simple and concise and friendly in our communications going out to residents. But a lot of the time that most of them have any dealings with us is when they ring up or when they drop an email into a bit of an abyss and eventually it comes back from somebody. And I think that I would feel more reassured if that specifically were in here, because how we communicate when somebody else is driving the agenda, how we communicate reactively, if you like, is as big a measure of how well we're doing it as the stuff that we're allowed, that we're in a better position to control and to manage. The stuff coming out from us, you'd expect us to make sure that's clear and concise and whatever, because we're driving it. It's how we respond that, from the experience that we've all had fed back from thousands of residents, that needs also to be included in this strategy.
Thank you. Again, I feel like I've got the weight of responsibility for the whole council in some ways. But you're right.
Yeah, unfortunately, you are the guys who show them how to speak. So, yes.
You are right. And it only takes one bad experience, doesn't it? And there's the old saying about, if you have a bad experience, you tell X number of people. Again, it is going to be a bit of a change. I think I've been thinking about how we make sure that this just isn't a sort of document that sits on the shelf gathering dust, and that we need our chief executive and others to really front this up and talk to staff about how important this is. I think most people don't set out to have a discourteous conversation with residents, but sometimes if they're feeling the pressure, that can happen. So I think we need to reiterate, and it is there in the forward and elsewhere, how important that is. But as I say, that can get lost. So I think we'll find ways to bring that to life. In terms of plain English, it is there, but if it needs to be stronger, it's my absolute passion, as colleagues know, and I rewrite far too many things that people send me with more plain English, but we need to make that the culture, and we need to make sure that people understand really what that means, and that you can normally cut what you've written in half and still have a very good, probably better letter. So we'll be rolling out that training across the council as well.
Lovely. I mean, I would say, if we could get more and more council members responding to residents' questions the way you respond to ours, I think it'd be a better place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Councillor Abbas.
Yeah, just a quick one. Obviously, I think we did discuss this in last meeting as well. Obviously, you did mention this, like 92% of residents, they use internet. So obviously, there are 8%. So obviously, all these strategies or communication strategies are mostly online, or through websites. So how, in terms of how we will reach out to these 8%, because mostly we all know those are the most vulnerable individuals, whether they are old age, whether they have some serious issues. So how, in terms of, obviously is a big number, 8%. So how we will kind of communicate or reach out to these 8%?
I think it depends what it is you're trying to communicate about. So we've had lots of conversations about this. We know that our e-newsletter is our most effective way to reach residents, but we also know that there will be some people who are excluded from that, so we can't put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. We do use a range of methods. So, for example, an engagement exercise that we carried out in Grays over the summer, we leafleted every household. Now, you know, we can't do that for everything, but I think when it's something that is really fundamentally important to people in the area, you want everyone to have the chance to know. And then we laid on in-person opportunities to engage as well as an electronic form. So really what we would want is a mix of things. When you've got a campaign like cost of living, in reality, it's going to be older people who are often more digitally illiterate, who need that information most. So it is about using all of our ways. It's using counsellors, it's using VCS partners, it's using our housing officers when they're knocking on doors. They're doing a fantastic job at the moment when they go and visit residents. If they just think maybe this person's struggling, they'll say, are you aware you might be eligible for pension credit? We can help you with it. So it really is getting the whole council to make sure, and you know, as you know, Councillor Abbas working with faith leaders and others who often have that direct relationship, making sure that we're getting information out to other people so they can be advocates and pass that on as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, a few from me and a few comments. Comment first of all, there's something that's irked me for a while, and it's in relation to the forward on page 29, which I know you can't specifically comment about, but is that, and if we move to page 31, which talks about our aims, none of us should ever think that, you know, we should forget or try to bury or move away or stop learning from the financial catastrophe that occurred at this place. But I suppose at some point, we do have to start thinking that our message from the get-go should be a bit more upbeat and positive and about looking to the future. When you instantly start a document with quite a negative tone about what happened, it kind of, for me, it sets a negative tone for the rest of the document. We know we're never going to forget what happened here for as long as Thurrock Council exists, and I hope it's not too long before it's abolished and we have a local government review. But for as long as it exists, we're always going to have to be mindful of what happened and remember and learn from that catastrophe. But I do think we're sort of, I'm reading lots of reports and strategy, which it's almost like it's a cut and paste every time. It's cut and paste section around that, which I think is a bit overly negative. And the other point, I have to make this because, as I say, it irks me. It's in recent years, other people have told Thurrock's story, and then in our aims, Thurrock is best known nationally for its financial mistakes. No, it's not. The council is. We must get away from this idea that in Thurrock the world revolves around the council. Most of what happens here, the big industry, the go-getters, the people who go to work, the things that make Thurrock a success, don't happen because of the council. They happen despite the council. And I really think it's important that we don't talk Thurrock down. Thurrock is, you know, a place of commerce, innovation, go-getters. As I said, I don't think we should tar Thurrock and the borough and what happens here with the mistakes that happened in this place. I think as an individual, I really get annoyed when I read things like Thurrock has made mistakes or Thurrock is known for the mistakes. No, the council is. There's so many fantastic things that are happening in Thurrock, as I say, and they're happening not because of the council usually. They get on and do it. And I think it's really important that we don't talk down the whole borough because of what happened here. We've got more success out there than most other boroughs, more business, more commerce than other local authorities can only dream of. So for my part, I think we need to draw a distinction between Thurrock, the place, which is a great place to live and work. I mean, you read the forum, it says Thurrock is, the borough's become famous not because it's a fantastic place to live and work. Well, yes, it is. Yes, it really is. So we need to stop talking about Thurrock down and not using what happened here as an example of how to sum the borough up as a whole. That's my comment. I don't expect a response to that, obviously, but it's a point I have to make, that we shouldn't keep tarring the whole of Thurrock, the whole of the borough, which has got so much to sing and talk about. We could fill this meeting up to midnight talking about it. The mistakes made at this council and what happened at the council don't sum up Thurrock. I mean, I think that's a point we need to make very clear. I'm reading that far too often at the moment, and I just think it's a shame. A couple of other questions probably would have been better asked at the last meeting, but there's going to be obviously some flitting back and forwards. Page 32, It says the council wants to speak especially to young people and people from BME groups. Why particularly those groups? I know, you know, across public sector generally, there's a recognition that people from BME groups are underrepresented. I understand all that, but it brings me on to my next point. You say in here that Thurrock has spoken or engaged with some communities better than others. So my question is, why do we particularly want to engage with young people and BME groups? Because as a councillor, I don't. I want to engage with everybody. I want to engage as much with older people as I do with BME groups or young people. Is there specific evidence relevant to Thurrock which suggests we should make that assumption in this strategy?
Thank you. There's a lot there. I will come back on your comment about Thurrock and not being the council. I think that's really helpful, actually, and I think that's easily changed. So thank you, and you're right. I think on the tone generally, it's a really hard call, because when we put positive things out, particularly on social media, all we get is a backlash against what went before. So I'm not sure everyone is quite ready to move on, and I think getting that tone right is important, that we need to show we're not suddenly saying everything's fantastic, and so there's a balance to be struck there, but I absolutely take that on board, and we can look at that again. In terms of the groups, they are underrepresented. We can see that in our consultation exercises. It was one of the very first set of data I looked at. We are heavily overrepresented by older white residents in all our consultations, and underrepresented in black and minority ethnic groups, underrepresented in most protected groups, and underrepresented with young people, unless we've gone the extra mile and done something specific. So there's some pieces of work we've done where we've gone into schools, but those groups are, as you say, Chair, more difficult to reach in any part of the country. And because the census data shows us that those are the groups that are growing most in our borough, I think we have a duty to go over and beyond to reach them, so that we have a representative sample. Not that we're doing more with specific groups, but that our decisions are being influenced in a representative way. So that's why I've highlighted those groups.
Thank you. That answers the question, rather than it just being a cut and paste of things that you see in public sector reports. You clearly said there's a reason for it, which I didn't understand from reading it. So you've answered the question there. Thank you. Just going to return, we really laboured this point, I think, at the last meeting around the internet and ensuring that everybody are signed up to it. And again, perhaps these questions would have been best asked them, but I just wanted to be clear, it's only a brief answer. I only want a brief answer. On page 35, we know from research that people, I think, let me just find it, hang on, page 35. We know from research of residents that local people's preferred way to find out about the council is via our website. Just very quickly, what was that research? I've got two questions, I'll ask them at the same time. What was the research from which we deduced that? And the other question is around the word use. You say 92% of our residents use the internet. I think there's a difference between having access to the internet and using it. So I'm just what's your understanding or definition of use? How do we measure that use?
So the survey was carried out before I was here, so I didn't write the question, so I don't know exactly what was meant by that. But I think the sense is it's not just that you have a computer in your house or a smartphone, it's that you do use it in with some sort of regularity, but I don't have any more information on that. The chart beneath that paragraph is the data that we're referring to, and that came from a survey of residents. I think it was a representative sample, which suggests it was over 1,000 residents. It was carried out in 2022, I think, and it asked a range of questions about residents' communications preferences. So that is where that came from. We are planning to do a broader piece of research with residents and find some more up-to-date information, but that is pretty standard across most councils, I would say, that kind of set of proportions.
Thank you. And in terms of the resident survey, this is all something we've done for years. I know we've always done it, but I'm personally yet to ever come across a resident who knows about the resident survey and has ever taken part in it. Can you just remind us, how do we promote that? What are the avenues we use to get that out there to the widest audience?
So we don't. It's the one bit of research we don't promote ourselves. We would buy it in. It would be done by a reputable company. We'd normally go out for 3 quotes. I've been talking to other councils locally about who they've used. And then those firms will go out and carry out the research themselves. So we don't promote it at all, other than potentially to tell residents that it's happening, so they're not, they don't think it's a scam or a, marketing company. But the companies that do that are experts in that field and do similar work for other councils across the country. So obviously the big names, people like Ipsos Mori, but there are a lot of smaller companies as well that do that kind of very focused research with residents.
Okay, thank you. So it is literally like market research. It's not something, you already said we don't do it internally, but is it literally a case of some of that data is for telephone conversations, is it a range of avenues? That's what I'm trying to get to. We use a range of avenues to speak to different residents.
There are a range of options, and you can, and I would normally prefer to then build on whatever you get back through some sort of survey with some small focus groups, which allow you to test for example, different types of communications, understand how people digest that information as well. So yes, but companies are becoming more and more technical in how they do it. There's lots of different ways, but traditionally they've generally been done by telephone.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Are there any final questions or comments? Anything to add? Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just to weigh in on that, the question of tone, positive, negative, I think it's a very important distinction. Thurrock as a whole, certainly, place of go-getters, big industries, etc. Those are some of the key people that we're communicating with. And I don't know what our level of trust is with them. I think we do know that we have a job to do with rebuilding trust with residents. So yes, it's nuanced, but I think we do have to get the balance right between being positive, but also accepting that a lot of residents will be looking at us through a filter of, we know what you did, and it's going to take a while for you to prove that you're better than that. So yeah, Thurrock, certainly Thurrock as a whole, let's not undersell Thurrock, but I think actually in some ways I quite like the fact that you are acknowledging that we start from slightly south of where we'd like to. But yeah, let's try to be positive with it, and while not puffing smoke at people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do come back to the point. I think it's very important that we do distinguish, though, between Thurrock. I don't think the council's got any right, to be honest, to talk for Thurrock and say Thurrock is this. We can give it, but I do think it's important that we distinguish between the council and Thurrock, the place, which is ever more becoming a diverse, economically important area. When I read a report that says Thurrock is this, no, Thurrock Council is this. We have no right to sort of give this description of what Thurrock is because of what the council did. But I've laboured that point. You might think it's a minor point, but I don't. Someone who's lived in the borough all of my life, I think when I pick up a council document that says Thurrock is best known for its financial mistakes, no, Thurrock isn't. Thurrock Council is best known, but it's a point I've made. Thank you. So I think we've given that a second really good airing. Thank you again, Louise, for coming here. It's been really helpful. I think we note the strategy, note the progress which has been made. I'm sure we'll hear from you again in due course. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
And
very
that
much.
brings us to item 7, which is Performance Management and Assurance Framework Report. And that's Sarah, are you leading on this? Patrick is. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for taking this report tonight. The Performance Management and Assurance Framework is the next step from the corporate plan, which councillors will know was adopted unanimously by full council over the summer. And so the papers you have in front of you do a few things. The policy document sets out how we will approach corporate performance management in the organisation and the changes we need to make internally within the council to make that happen. There is an evidence-based document which provides you with the evidence that we've used to base those changes on and that approach to that those internal changes. And then the third document that sits alongside the detailed report is the suite of milestones and metrics that we suggest are used to measure our progress against the corporate plan for year one. There is a mix of milestones and metrics because of the large amount of work that is going on, the large amount of change going on within the council. It feels appropriate that members have a route through the milestones to see progress or not of a range of projects over time. So you'll see that the milestones refer to project-based work that get us to the outcomes of the corporate plan. And you'll see that the metrics are taken from the large amount of data that services have that they engage with cabinet members about on a regular basis and they use to deliver and hone services. But what executive directors and teams have decided should be elevated to corporate performance to show you an overall direction of travel across those services. And so between those milestones and metrics, we hope that we've created a suite of evidence that will, once agreed, come to this committee, as you'll see from the documentation, on a quarterly basis for you to consider. And it is our intention that eventually that data will be considered alongside both the financial information and the intervention information that the committee receives. That won't always happen in this first year. It's not possible on the current timeline of meetings for that always to happen, but it is our intention that once the election happens and we move to a different cycle, that as we progress this work, you will see performance as a suite of documentation, and these milestones and metrics form part of that. I'll just close by saying this is an iterative process. We're here to get your honest feedback on the approach to the milestones and metrics. We're really keen to understand if that works for you. We're keen to understand that now, but we're also keen to understand as you start to see the data, as the quarterly data comes through the system. We know this won't be perfect immediately, but we're really keen to get started and we're really keen to have your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions? Councillor Howden?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Patrick, for your reports. Just two comments. The section regarding contract management and procurement. The two comments I'd make would be, certainly when I was chair of the Housing Scrutiny Committee, we were scrutinising stuff at times less than 24 hours before key procurement decisions were going to Cabinet, because there was, I gather for previous iterations of that committee, there was never enough forethought to say that a £150 million repairs contract is going to be re-procured over a 9-month period. The scrutiny of that process needs to, in earnest, really begin 20 months out. And as a result, I can't honestly say we're going to get a good repairs contract, because at no stage were any of the push points adequately considered before the button was pushed. But on the actual contract management side, in terms of the job that I do within the NHS, I think so many public sector bodies can learn from what adult social care in Thurrock does. We are by far one of the leanest and cheapest authorities in the country, and Thurrock social care, PCN development, etc., is often used as a byword for contractual efficiency and incredibly clear outcomes for what it is that we intended by forcing health inequalities in the opposite direction. So if there's anything that we could learn from what I think was an unsuccessful process in housing, in terms of contract management and procurement, and what we could also learn from adult social care in terms of their incredibly successful setup, I think that would be of massive benefit. And the only question specific I was going to ask was the reference to performance and development reviews. We're going to PDR people on things like collaboration and integrity. I can't quite work out how you PDR someone for integrity. Councillor Kerrin's shaking his head. Clearly he would be difficult to pin down on such a subject, but...
Thank you very much, Councillor. One for your comments, which are extremely helpful, and you take us to the absolute nub of the policy document on performance management. We are very clear that performance management across the council, in terms of corporate performance, is not the job of one department and to be left by the others. What we are trying to do, what this document attempts to do, is build a system and a culture where, as you say, we learn from our good practice and we learn also from our mistakes or where our practice could have been better. We will use the new governance that is proposed, the new board that is proposed in these papers, to bring officers together to share exactly on those points and ensure that where there are efficiencies to be made, processes to be changed, to drive performance, both corporate performance and service level performance, we will do that. So absolutely those examples you demonstrated here tonight will be examples of that we will want to share across the organisation. On your question, it's very important, of course, that the development of individuals and members of staff and how we hold them to account for their performance considers our corporate objectives. And what this document is trying to do is say that as an organisation, we will look to our corporate objectives. We will look to our corporate plan and our deliverables and how we deliver those when we measure our performance. We're also saying we will do that for our individuals, where we will ask individuals how their work contributes to the aims and objectives of the council. That will, of course, that is work for our HR colleagues to do, and that is, of course, dependent on their role, but that also leans to the golden thread about how everybody, all the cogs in the machine, leaning towards the same outcome. Now, of course, there are subjective, or more subjective examples of how you look at somebody's performance, and those examples that you refer to were actually the values that my colleague was discussing earlier in her presentation about the people strategy. And so I think when we're looking at people's performance in that sense, we're looking at how individuals model those values in our organisation and show that they're public servants who model those values. So while that might be difficult to pin down, as you say, as a line manager and a leader in the organisation, I'd be looking for examples of those values in my staff, and I think my colleagues would across the organisation.
Thank you. Councillor Howland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Patrick, for your answer. Just to labour on the contract management procurement just for a moment longer, one of the things that always irked me when I was in Cabinet was when we looked at KPIs for contract management performance, it was pretty much always based on adherence. So did we get from the contracted activity what we wanted? And if it was green, everyone would be very satisfied, but that never actually provided weighting based on the quantum of the activity. So for example, we could have a load of green KPIs because grass was cut on time and bits and pieces. Yeah, important stuff for our residents, but not the end of the world. Whereas you could have an obscure amber KPI on things like domiciliary care contracts. Now, one of them costs a fortune and could risk lives. The other one could be addressed the next week by just flooding the system with a slight bit of resource. So will you ensure that as we go through the process of contract management and procurement, we're not just looking at are our contracts hitting the design KPIs that we had when we went out for tender for that activity, but we're also giving appropriate weighting. So frankly, we don't end up with 1,000 KPIs. We dwell on 900 obsessively that aren't overly mission critical. And then there are a couple in there that may slip down the pecking order that really we can't afford to.
Thank you, Councillor. That's incredibly helpful, and I'll take away the your example about contract management and ensure that the metrics we're using on contract management are more holistic, as you refer to. I think there's just some other points on your wider point that's probably helpful to make. I think the use of milestones and the use of a timeline against milestones allows members to see slippage on projects, and I think that is helpful. I think that adds colour to the metrics, and that bringing the two things together allows us to balance the kind of time spent on things and how far off, if there is slippage, how far off that is. That gives Cabinet and committees like this the opportunity to see a more rounded picture of milestones and on metrics, just so we understand exactly what we're measuring. We are, for each of these metrics, producing what we're calling a data sheet in my central team. So we will understand what the metric is, where it comes from, what that data tells us, what the direction of travel, and what the benchmark is for each of those once they're agreed. So as well as looking at your specific example, I just wanted to make you aware that we're doing some wider work to ensure the milestones and metrics tell a more holistic story about the direction of travel.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Fox.
Good evening. Page 53, which is the plan, do, report and improve cycle. With what's there, is that going to be subject to audit to make sure that it is actually happening?
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor. So there are a number of roles in terms of making sure that this work is actually happening. There is a role for my team and the governance described in this document to ensure that is happening. As the data is reported through the system, there are roles and responsibilities in the back of this document so that Cabinet members, executive directors and assistant directors can look at the data, look at what that information tells us, change our approach or make tweaks to our approach if we need to, and so there is governance there. And of course, there is always a role for internal audit to take a look at any of these processes, the governance around these processes, and make suggestions for improvement. I would also say that these plans are iterative. Once we have done one cycle of reporting through this financial year, we will use the opportunity of the election and the move to the new civic years, because we'll be moving to a 4-year cycle, to really look at whether cycles like this are working and how we might improve them for the financial years in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone else? Okay. Just a couple of questions or comments from me. In terms of the targets and the metrics, I know there's been quite a robust process in arriving at these, but we haven't had a corporate plan for a while, but we've had plenty of KPIs, and once upon a time, this committee, when I was on it before, it seemed all it used to do was look at reams and reams of KPIs. But what I'm really interested in is, throughout the report, it tells us that service leads have played a pivotal role in sort of drawing up the targets and the metrics, etc., etc. For people out there, what assurances can you give that those have been challenged, those targets, those metrics have been challenged? Because to put it crudely, that a skeptic might say, if you say to a service, come up with those targets, those measurables, those metrics that you think we should be looking at, they might go away and think, well, we're doing this, 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 and this really well, so we'll measure that. Or they'll set targets or use metrics that are easily deliverable. So the question is, how have we made sure that what we're measuring is double-checked, if you like, but it's robust and will properly stretch and challenge the council? We're not just end up in some service areas reporting on what we really do well anyway.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor. And I think you get to the heart of the issue in terms of trust when it comes to performance reporting. Councillors, senior leaders and residents have to trust that the data we provide them with is truthful, accurate and a reflection of where the council is. And so we have gone through, as you say, a process of deciding these milestones and metrics and quality assuring where that data comes from. But we have also been through an exercise of benchmarking, and for each of the metrics, whether it's new data or it's been reported on before, we have looked at a benchmark, and that could be a national benchmark, a local benchmark. We use a system called SIP for Nearest Neighbours is an example. So SIP have a tool where a local authority can look at its nearest neighbours, not geographically, but in terms of demographics or size, and you look at the performance of other local authorities against those measurements. You take your benchmark from that. And what we will do for each of these metrics, and we can provide once that process is complete, is we will provide the benchmark. So where we have identified a benchmark, where we might be above or below the benchmark and therefore call ourselves good or bad, to be crude, there will be an understanding, a shared understanding of why we use that benchmark and how we achieved it.
Thank you. And the new Insights and Performance Board, could you just tell us a bit more about that and how that will be, how will we arrive at who sits on it? How do we know they're the best officers to be on it, and what training, what support will be in place to make sure that they're equipped to do the job?
Yep. It's important to say that the board, as described in these papers, also has an important role in the previous question you asked me about how we make sure these are the right things, we're measuring the right things, and we're not just measuring things that are all green or the easy things to achieve. There is a role and a culture change in this approach that allows officers from other teams to scrutinise and be a critical friend across services, and so we want to use the board to do that. The board will sit in the central team under my purview, and we will consider the most appropriate officers based at the moment on the work those officers do on performance. The reality of the situation is that in Thurrock, in services, there are large amounts of data because of statutory requirement or because of skill of officers that we have about our services. We have a lot of information. And so where there is best practice, we will use those colleagues on the board as an example to spread that best practice and stop some of the inconsistencies that we see in some of the data and some of the performance data gathering. And so we will go through a robust process of identification of those individuals. I think you're quite right when you say what learning and development will be in place, and this links again to the people strategy that you have heard this evening. We have to be clear that the corporate centre of the council is changing and our corporate priorities are changing. The way in which we look at our performance is going to need people around in the organisation who can do that. So at the moment, in my team, we are bringing together the business intelligence functions from across the council. We are centralising those functions. We're also bringing together expertise on strategy and policy in the central functions as well. Those exercises, while helpful in centralising those functions, also give me a very detailed understanding of the abilities or gaps in the skills of the organisation. And as we redesign those services with members and with executive directors, we will consider skills gaps and improving learning and development in those new teams.
Thanks, Patrick. And final question from me. I think in the past, my observation has been that with some of the most senior officers who are no longer here, thankfully, when it comes to this kind of thing, there's been a tendency to delegate and castigate. when things don't go right. So my question, the buck stops with the senior leadership team, quite frankly. How would you say the senior leadership team is demonstrating direct ownership of the metrics and milestones? How are they taking direct responsibility?
Thank you, Chair. You're quite right that the senior leadership team take responsibility for the wider performance of the council. You'll see clear roles and responsibilities set out in this documentation, but also the way in which the senior leadership team have approached this piece of work to get these milestones and metrics to this place. They have really engaged in their meetings about how that should look, how that should feel, the right data that should be, and they've given their professional opinions on that data, and so that has been incredibly useful in getting us to this point. Going forward, the senior leadership team will hold quarterly meetings to review the data, and we would expect them in those conversations to be a critical friend to each other on their performance. The other key thing about the role of SLT is that they come together to look at the overall corporate performance, but they're individually responsible for the service data that relates to the services in their directorates. And they are already developing relationships with cabinet members for those areas to delve into that data with cabinet members, with their assistant directors, chief officers and service leads to actually change the way the organisation works based on what the data is telling us. That moves us to their leadership taking us through a cultural change, because the cultural change, as you say, is about being truthful about performance and not being worried about what the outcome might be, but knowing that the outcome of reporting appropriately is that improvements will be made, not that there will be castigation, for example. And so we realise that, as with many things at Thurrock Council, we are on a journey to change the culture, but from my experience, the SLT are leading that cultural change in the way they're engaging with this work.
Thank you, that's reassuring. Councillor Abbas.
Yeah, thank you. So just a quick one. Thank you first, Patrick. Just a quick one. On financial sustainability and financial management. So it's mostly focusing on kind of delivering savings and achieving sustainability. So obviously, looking in what current situation is in Thurrock. So obviously, in terms of investment, in terms of recovery, excuse me if I have missed something, but I haven't seen anything in terms of how we will monitor or kind of scrutinize. Obviously, I can see there is a managerial level reporting and analysis, but how in terms of these recoveries or in terms of investment we'll be managing?
So on the financial milestones and metrics that you see there, that's reported data on divestments and managing of debt and various things that the finance team have put forward. That is data, as in many cases across this work, that is data that those teams hold already and use for their day-to-day work. And so I would expect that once that comes to the corporate level, we can of course see the patterns across the quarterly reports and absolutely comment on that. And and when you review this data, there'll be colleagues from the finance team here to take your questions on those financial points. But I would just add that of course that is about corporate performance, and of course the work of services is overseen through the normal service delivery of those objectives. So I would expect the kind of appropriate member boards and the recovery boards, given the financial nature of the intervention and the role of commissioners, I would expect the reporting of that progress to continue. And it brings an important point that when you look at this data, it's important that you have in front of you the financial data for the savings and the outturn, and you also have the IRP reporting on the movement of the intervention, so that you can look at that across the suite of reporting, and that is what we will get to for the financial year 2025-2026.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on. We have got some recommendations. I don't think we'll, you know, we've commented on it. I don't think we've got any specific recommendations for Cabinet as such, but I think we, as a committee, can say that we broadly endorse the strategy, and we look forward to its implementation. And thank you, Patrick, for coming and explaining this in a way that's really helpful. I've had some private meetings with you, and it's always, you know, helpful to get your perspective and explanation on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so item 8 then, it takes us on to the work programme. Again, it's a question of noting the work programme, but asking, are there any items at this point which members want added to the work programme? Any comments at all on that item? No? Okay, in that case, we note the work programme as is. It's bound to change, but at the moment, we're content with the work programme as it is. Councillor Green?
When we get near the budget, are we going to need something similar to what we're going to be doing with that? Are we doing something similar to what we did last year, or are we going to have a longer meeting?
Well, for my part, I think if we do what we did last year, it'll automatically be a failure, because last year's was an exercise in how not to do something. And if you're a cabinet member, it was the lightest scrutiny that I've ever had. Just, you know, so I hope we don't do. Well, we won't be doing exactly the same. We won't be following that blueprint. It's a very pertinent point. I don't think it's fair to turn to anyone now and ask them to explain. But plans are afoot. But to be honest, you raise a very good point, because I think as the relevant committee, we should know about that well in advance. I think what I'll do is ask officers to contact the committee outside of this meeting with an explanation of what's planned, and we can comment. But I think you're right. One of the things I wanted to do at the last committee was have somebody come and explain the process so that we had some input rather than being told how it's going to be done. And I'm keen to see that still happens. So Councillor Fox and I, as chair and vice chair, have had some discussions and input around that. But you're absolutely right. The committee as a whole needs to have some opportunity to comment before we're actually told this is what's going to happen. So if you're happy with that, I'll ask that we get an email brief as soon as possible.
Definitely, Chair. It's just the only thing to mention, it's got 3 items on that month. We might need to have an extra meeting. I don't know, whatever you and the Vice Chair feels is necessary. I just feel, being the budget, it's going to be quite an important subject, and we're going to need time to debate that.
Yeah, quite correct again. We are looking at the dates. There will be some change there, but that meeting can only really be about the budget. If I think back to last year, if we'd concluded that meeting and said, right, now on to the other items, I think it would have been, you know, even more farcical. So, yeah, it will be a standalone meeting, I think, and it will, obviously, it won't just be this committee. We'll have the chairs of the other committees there as well. So, I'll ask officers to give us a brief by email. And obviously, any comments, make sure we get them in early. But a very good point. Thanks for raising that. Any other comments? No. Okay. So thank you for that. So the work programme is noted, and that just brings us to the close of the meeting. It is. It's 18 minutes past 8, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending tonight. Thank you to officers, and the meeting I'll now bring to a close.